October 15th, 1993. A cramped rehearsal space in North Hollywood. The kind of place where dreams either come alive or die under flickering fluorescent lights and soundproofing that had seen better decades. Kurt Cobain sat in the corner with his battered Fender Jag-Stang, picking at strings that hadn't been changed in weeks. The instrument looked as worn as its owner. Chipped paint, duct tape holding pieces together, but somehow still capable of producing sounds that could move mountains. Across the room, Courtney Love paced like a caged animal. Her platinum hair was a mess, her makeup smeared from hours of arguing with record executives who didn't understand her vision. Hole's latest album was facing radio censorship issues, and she was taking her frustration out on anyone within earshot. "They want sanitized rebellion," she spat, lighting another cigarette despite the no-smoking sign on the wall. "They want the anger without the honesty. They want us to be dangerous enough to sell records but safe enough for their precious airwaves." Kurt said nothing. He rarely did when Courtney was in one of these moods. Instead, he let his fingers wander across the fretboard, finding melodies that existed somewhere between consciousness and dream. "You know what your problem is?" Courtney turned to face him, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of amplifiers on standby. "You write these beautiful, dark songs, and then you act surprised when the world doesn't know what to do with them." Kurt's fingers paused on the strings. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you write about depression, addiction, suicide, all the things that matter, and then you're shocked when radio programmers get nervous. You want to have it both ways. You want to be authentic and commercial." "I never asked to be commercial." Courtney laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bullshit, Kurt. Smells Like Teen Spirit wasn't an accident. You knew exactly what you were doing when you wrote that hook." The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Kurt had heard variations of this criticism before, from music journalists, from fans who thought Nirvana had sold out by signing to a major label, from punk purists who believed success was inherently suspicious. But hearing it from Courtney stung differently. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was an artist he respected, someone who understood the impossible balance between integrity and survival in the music industry. "So what are you saying?" Kurt asked, his voice quieter now. Courtney stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "I'm saying prove me wrong. Write something that's so honest, so real, so completely you, that radio won't dare touch it. Write something that scares them. And then what? No one hears it? Then at least you'll know you didn't compromise. Then at least you'll know you said what you really meant to say." Kurt stared at her for a long moment, then looked down at his guitar. The challenge was implicit but clear. Stop hiding behind metaphors and obscure lyrics. Stop writing songs that could be interpreted as anthems when they were meant to be confessions. "Fine," he said finally, "but you have to listen, really listen. No interrupting, no commentary. Just be here." Courtney nodded and sat down on a milk crate that served as the room's only other chair. She stubbed out her cigarette and folded her hands in her lap, uncharacteristically still. Kurt adjusted his guitar, tuned a few strings that had gone flat, and then began to play. The chord progression that emerged was unlike anything he'd written before. It wasn't the loud, quiet, loud dynamics that had become Nirvana's trademark. It wasn't the pop sensibilities masked by distortion that had made them famous. This was something else entirely. Raw, acoustic, built around finger-picked arpeggios that seemed to shimmer in the stale air of the rehearsal room. When Kurt began to sing, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I wake up every morning with your ghost beside my bed, wonder if I'm living or if I'm already dead. The needle and the damage done, but the damage keeps on coming, and I'm running out of reasons to keep running." The lyrics were more direct than anything Kurt had ever written publicly. No metaphors about teenage spirits or hidden meanings wrapped in grunge poetry. This was Kurt Cobain, unfiltered, singing about the darkness that followed him everywhere. They say that love will save us, but love just makes it worse when you're drowning in the shallows of your own addictive thirst. And the money and the fame just amplify the pain, till you're praying to die young before you go insane. Courtney's expression shifted as the song continued. The cynical smirk she'd worn moments earlier faded, replaced by something that looked like recognition, or maybe fear. Kurt's guitar work was intricate, but never showy. Each note served the song, supported the brutal honesty of the lyrics. This wasn't performance, this was exorcism. So tell me, baby, tell me, what's the point of getting clean when the world outside is dirtier than any place I've been, and the voices in my head keep singing lullabies of death while I'm counting every reason for my very last breath? The song built slowly, adding layers of meaning with each verse. Kurt's voice grew stronger, more desperate, as if the act of singing these words was both killing him and keeping him alive. I tried to write in riddles, tried to hide behind the noise, but the quiet is the loudest of all the devil's toys, and the truth is like a cancer that eats you from inside, till there's nothing left but honesty and nowhere left to hide. Courtney felt tears forming in her eyes, though she couldn't have explained why. She'd seen Kurt perform hundreds of times, had heard him practice new songs in their apartment, had been present for some of Nirvana's most intense recording sessions. But this was different. This was Kurt without any armor, without any of the protective mechanisms he usually employed to keep the world at arm's length. They want anthems for the broken, but they don't want to see that the broken are the only ones who know they're not free. And the radio won't play this, 'cause it's too close to the bone. But I'd rather die forgotten than live like I'm a clone. As the song reached its climax, Kurt's guitar playing became more aggressive, more urgent. But instead of the distorted chaos of Nirvana's typical sound, this remained achingly clear. Every note rang out like a bell tolling. So here's my final message to the kids who feel like me. Sometimes the only freedom is in your own tragedy. Don't follow in my footsteps. Don't make the same mistakes. But if you do, at least be honest about what breaks. The last chord hung in the air for what felt like an eternity before finally fading into silence. Kurt set his guitar down gently, as if it might shatter from the weight of what had just been expressed through it. Courtney sat frozen on her milk crate, tears streaming down her face. She'd asked for honesty, but she hadn't been prepared for this level of raw confession. "Kurt," she started, then stopped. "What do you say to someone who has just laid their soul bare in 4 minutes of music?" "You wanted something radio wouldn't touch," Kurt said, his voice hoarse from singing. "I don't think Clear Channel's going to be adding that to their rotation anytime soon." Courtney wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jesus, Kurt, that was beautiful and terrifying. It's the truth, or as close to it as I can get in a song. You can't release this?" The words came out before Courtney could stop them. Kurt looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why not?" "Because," she struggled to find words that didn't sound hypocritical after her challenge. "Because it's too much. Because people will worry. Because they'll think you're..." "Suicidal?" Kurt finished. "What if I am?" The question hung between them like a confession. Courtney had known about Kurt's depression, his struggles with addiction, his complicated relationship with fame, but hearing him articulate it so directly, so matter-of-factly, was like being hit with a cold wave. "Then we get you help," she said. "We figure it out. But you don't release a song that sounds like a suicide note." Kurt nodded slowly. "So even you want me to censor myself? That's not what I mean, isn't it? You dared me to write something honest, something that would scare radio programmers. But now that I have, you want me to hide it away because it's too honest." Courtney stood up and walked over to where Kurt was sitting. She knelt down beside his chair and took his hands in hers. "I want you to live, Kurt. I want you to make music and be weird and piss off the establishment for the next 40 years. But I don't want you to write your own obituary and set it to music." Kurt looked down at their intertwined fingers. "Maybe that's the only way I know how to be honest anymore. Maybe that's what happens when you become a symbol instead of a person. Then stop being a symbol, just be Kurt." "I don't remember how." The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside Courtney. This wasn't the tortured artist persona that the media loved to write about. This was a scared, lost 26-year-old who had accidentally become the voice of a generation and couldn't figure out how to live with that responsibility. "Then we'll figure it out together," she said, "but not by writing songs that feel like goodbye." They sat in silence for several minutes, holding hands in a rehearsal room that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. Outside, Los Angeles continued its relentless pursuit of the next big thing, but inside this soundproof space, time had stopped. "What if we recorded it anyway?" Kurt said eventually. "Not for release, just to have it, to prove that I could write something completely honest, even if no one ever hears it." Courtney considered this. The song was undeniably powerful, a piece of art that captured something essential about Kurt's experience. But it was also dangerous in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Okay," she said finally, "but promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll keep writing. Not just songs like that one. Write happy songs, write angry songs, write songs about whatever you want. But don't let this be the only truth you tell." Kurt squeezed her hands. "I promise." They did record the song later that week in a small studio in Burbank. Just Kurt and his guitar, captured on tape in a single take. No overdubs, no production tricks, just the raw honesty that Courtney had challenged him to find. The recording was locked away in a vault along with other unreleased Nirvana material. It would remain there for years, a piece of musical autobiography too intense for public consumption. But the act of writing and recording it seemed to free something in Kurt. In the months that followed, he wrote some of his most hopeful material. Songs that acknowledged his struggles, but also suggested that survival was possible. Courtney would later say that October night in North Hollywood was both the scariest and most important conversation of their relationship. "I pushed him to be honest," she told a journalist years later, "and he showed me what complete honesty looked like. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time." The song itself became legendary among Nirvana's inner circle. Band members who heard it spoke of it in hushed tones, recognizing it as perhaps Kurt's most powerful piece of writing. But they also understood why it could never be released. When Kurt died 6 months later, some people blamed Courtney for pushing him too hard that night, for demanding a level of honesty that may have been psychologically dangerous. But those closest to the situation knew better. The song hadn't caused Kurt's death. It had briefly saved his life. By giving voice to his darkest thoughts, by turning his pain into art, he had found a way to survive them, at least for a while. In 2004, on the 10th anniversary of Kurt's death, Courtney played a bootleg recording of the song for a Rolling Stone journalist. She cried through the entire 4 minutes, just as she had that first night in the rehearsal room. "He gave me exactly what I asked for," she said afterward. "Complete honesty, no compromise, no concern for commercial appeal. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, and it scared the hell out of me." The journalist asked if she regretted challenging Kurt to write something so raw. Courtney was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "because for one night, for one song, Kurt stopped hiding. He stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted him to be and just existed, purely, completely, honestly. And that was worth the risk. That was everything," she said. "That was why we fell in love with music in the first place. Not for the fame or the money or the recognition, but for those moments when you hear something so true that it changes you." The song remains unreleased to this day, locked away with Kurt's other private recordings. But its influence can be heard in the work of countless artists who learned about it secondhand, who understood that true honesty in art comes with a price, but that price might be worth paying. On that October night in 1993, Courtney Love dared Kurt Cobain to write something that radio wouldn't dare play. What he created was more than just a song. It was a piece of his soul, set to music and preserved forever. It was exactly the kind of honesty she'd asked for, and exactly the kind of honesty that proves sometimes the most important art is too powerful for public consumption. Some truths are meant to exist in the moment, in the space between two people who understand what it means to love someone who burns too bright for this world. The ripple effects of that night extended far beyond the confines of that cramped rehearsal room. The challenge Courtney had thrown down, to write without compromise, to create art that prioritized truth over commercial viability, became a philosophical touchstone for both artists. For Courtney, witnessing Kurt's complete vulnerability changed how she approached her own songwriting. Hole's subsequent material became more introspective, less concerned with shocking audiences, and more focused on genuine emotional expression. She would later credit that night with teaching her the difference between being provocative and being honest. Kurt showed me that real rebellion isn't about saying fuck you to the establishment, she explained in a 1997 interview. Real rebellion is about saying this is who I am, even when who you are doesn't fit into anyone's marketing plan. The song itself, despite never seeing official release, influenced a generation of alternative rock artists who heard about it through industry connections and bootleg trading networks. The idea that an artist could create something so powerful that it was deemed too dangerous for public consumption became a kind of holy grail for musicians seeking authenticity in an increasingly corporate music landscape. Frances Bean Cobain, Kurt and Courtney's daughter, would eventually hear the recording as an adult. In a 2014 social media post, she wrote, "Found something today that reminded me that my father was a human being first, an artist second, and a rock star last. Some art is too personal to share, but that doesn't make it less valuable." The recording quality itself was deliberately lo-fi, captured on a simple 4-track recorder that the studio kept for artists who wanted to demo material quickly. Kurt insisted on this approach, saying that the raw, unpolished sound better served the song's emotional content than any professional production could. Sound engineer Tommy Martinez, who worked that session, later described it as one of the most intense recording experiences of his career. Kurt played it through once, perfectly, and then looked at me and said, "That's it. No second takes, no overdubs." It was like he'd been holding this song inside himself for years and finally found the courage to let it out. The lyrics, when transcribed, filled barely 2 pages of handwritten text, but their impact was disproportionate to their brevity. Each line felt like a piece of Kurt's psyche, laid bare without pretense or artistic distance. Music critics who eventually heard bootlegs of the song described it as simultaneously the most beautiful and most disturbing piece of confessional songwriting ever recorded. In the years following Kurt's death, Courtney would sometimes reference that October night when asked about their relationship. Not the specific details of the song, which she considered sacred, but the moment when two artists challenged each other to reach beyond their comfort zones in service of truth. "We pushed each other to be better, to be more honest," she said. "Sometimes that was beautiful. Sometimes it was destructive. But it was never boring, and it was never fake." The challenge itself, to write something so honest that radio wouldn't dare play it, became a kind of artistic exercise among alternative musicians. Bands would dare each other to create their most uncompromising material, understanding that commercial viability was often the enemy of authentic expression. On that October night in 1993, when Courtney Love dared Kurt Cobain to write something that radio would never play, she unknowingly created one of rock music's most profound moments of truth-telling. The song that emerged was too honest for the world, but that honesty was exactly what made it beautiful.